The rules have sort of changed. The way that schools are using the tests have changed. In general, I think the most asked question I would get is, my kid would like to go to a school on the East Coast, so just the SAT, right? You say, wrong. The way that it used to be was the sort of outsides, so California, Washington State, Oregon, all the schools on the left coast, and then all the schools on the right coast were SAT schools, and then everybody in the middle was sort of this gray area and ACT schools. Now schools are okay, in fact encourage students to take the test that suits their learning styles better, because the tests are very different. So much so that the SAT back in around 2010, 2011 actually started seeing a huge slide in the amount of students taking the test, and they're like, okay, maybe we're doing something wrong, and that's when the shift happened to the new SAT. There are a few parents in here. Does anyone here have an older student that took the 2400 SAT, an older student, or are these, okay, so you have, where did they end up going, if you don't mind?
St. Mary's College in Maryland.
Awesome. It's a beautiful drive down there. Lots of books. Agriculture and maritime, very lovely. That said, the test that this student took is very different than the SAT that's being put out today. The change was so much bigger than it was from the old 1600 test to the 2400 test that I took. There are no more analogies, there's no more come on in, there's no more words like jingoism and munificence and taciturn. I only know what one of those words means, but that's okay. But that said, it's still a challenging test in different ways, and I think in ways that students and parents don't necessarily expect. So, let's start here. Anyone here a sophomore? 10th grade? No. Junior? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What grade are you in, my friend?
7.
You are in 7th grade. I would not have said that, so that's why I had to ask, right? Which is totally fine. Okay, so going into second semester junior year, how's it going?
Going all right.
Going all right?
I've taken the SAT this year, the SAT December.
So you have a December score. That's awesome. Lots of AP classes, few AP classes, somewhere in the middle.
Like 3 AP classes.
That's normal. Anyone taking more than 3 right now? I didn't take any of those. I did IB though, so it's different. Is anyone here going to an IB school? Okay, where did you go? You're at Annandale? You're at Washington. Lovely, yes. Very, very big IB program. They even have an IB school fair. Like there's schools, colleges that come knowing that they're an IB school, and I think that's awesome. So they understand how higher level, standard level works. One of the things that I've heard over the course of doing this, which I've been doing for about 6 or 7 years, is that junior year is almost like a second round of potty training. You have your child who's growing up and, all right, they're eating, they're starting to feed themselves, they're walking, they're kind of babbling a little bit, and they're still in diapers, and they refuse to get out of diapers, and oh my goodness, are they ever going to get out of diapers? Yes, right? But in that moment as a parent, it's really hard to kind of see past that. And junior year ends up being that second coming in that, oh my gosh, there's a lot more work. The work isn't necessarily more difficult, there's just a lot more of it. Would anybody agree with that? I mean, yes, some of it is harder. There are AP courses that are certainly A-push. Anyone taking AP US history? I did not, I did not take that class. World, AP World then? Okay, yeah. So it is a very challenging transition from 10th to 11th grade, and especially for first-time parents of that, and then of course first-time juniors, right? It's a little bit more difficult to kind of make that transition feel similar from 8th to 9th grade, but in a little bit of a different way. So one thing that I think has been very challenging for families is figuring out, okay, my kid's supposed to be taking X number of AP or IB courses, my student is supposed to be involved in 500 extracurricular activities and solving world hunger and calling the Dalai Lama and figuring out world peace, all these other things, just to get into school. When do they have time to study for these exams that are supposedly so important that schools are going to see this wonderful student on paper and say, oh, score's not high enough, let's put them in the no pile. Feels a little bit unfair, I think, right? And that's part of why there have been so many changes to how the tests are being used and so many changes as to what the test actually covers. The biggest push I think I've been hearing about in Virginia especially is that SOLs are starting to, some of them are actually no longer offered, which I think is kind of nice, but there's been a pretty big push to kind of just leave them out altogether because they feel like teachers are just teaching to the SOL material and not necessarily to the content, and that is a lot of what is happening with these other standardized tests. There's still a lot of great data that says, hey, the results of this test can predict fairly well how a student will do in college. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. So that's part of why they haven't gone away. I think eventually they'll go away. But for now, they're here and we have to deal with them. So maybe when you guys have kids, maybe they'll be out of the way, but we'll just have to see. So that's part of what I wanted to share at the outset for these tests. Do any of the parents have any specific questions regarding either of the tests in regard to maybe what their students should be doing or any questions in general? This opening session is meant to be a question answer in that sense, that hopefully I can share some information with you guys. So does anyone have any questions? A, so I can stop talking, and B, so you can actually ask me questions. Yes.
Can you summarize the difference between the SAT and the ACT and when one is better than the other?
Awesome question. The SAT is a test of, we're going to give you a lot of information. It's fairly difficult, but it's not unfamiliar. You have a lot of time to do it, but that top tier level of students are really the only ones that are going to see those higher level scores because they think differently. You have more time to do fewer questions, but they're harder to get through. The ACT is a speed test that says everyone is equally capable of doing these exercises, but the best students can do it the fastest. That's the difference. The ACT is scored out of 36 points. There are 4 sections that cover English, math, reading, and science. The SAT only covers incorporate the sciences in the reading and in some of the math questions, not too many. And the other difference is that the SAT has a section that has no calculator, which is not surprising to my students who took a PSAT because they turned to section 3 and said, wait, what, no calculator? Oh my goodness, right? That was a little bit scary, and that's definitely something new, and that's why I had, when I introduced it, I said that's part of why the tests are changing. Kids can pull out the technology and pretty much do anything, but do they know why they're doing it and what they're doing? So that's part of where that change came from.
Can I ask Jessica, if you know that you're not a fast test taker, so you're not really the best candidate for an ACT, should you take it? Like, is it detrimental not to take the ACT? Do you have to take the ACT?
Oh, absolutely not. And one of the biggest drivers as to which test a student should consider putting their energy towards is the one that matches their speed and learning style the best. So even if you are not a fast test taker, it doesn't mean that the SAT is the better exam because the math is harder. So if you feel like math isn't really your strong suit and you really like questions that say, hey, if x plus 5 equals 11, what is x? You're like, cool, I can do that in 10 seconds versus what does x mean in this context? Yeah, I have double the time to answer it, but if I don't understand where that's coming from, then it doesn't actually help me, right? So that's one way to think about it. One of the things that we'll do in the boot camp is we'll actually talk a little bit about, I have some practice items where students are gonna be able to get a feel for what that really looks like. Because I can sort of explain it, but it's always best to do as well. Great question. Did yours end up taking the SAT?
Yes.
Question.
Sure.
So my daughter, 7th grader,
Yes.
scheduled to take her ACT at Duke. And so is there any advantages to taking it that early?
Only to get exposure to the test, because AP exams, SAT, PSAT, that is all College Board. College Board has been in your lives since maybe 5th or 6th grade, but you just don't really know it. ACT, unless you're in the Midwest, you're not seeing a lot of it. They're starting to push out a couple of more assessments, like the pre-SAT and the ACT 10. The biggest reason why students do not choose the ACT is they're not familiar with it. And so then by the time they get to junior year and all these other things are happening, they don't really get a great assessment as to whether or not that's a good test for them, because they're just trying to figure it out. So by getting that exposure early and sort of seeing like some of the things I'm talking about with the speed and the difficulty and things like that, it's certainly very helpful, because then she'll have a really good sense of, is SAT better for me or ACT? Because schools will take either, it doesn't matter. Great question.
Sorry, Jessica, can I build on that question? Because if you do get a low score, are they
Mhm.
averaged? I remember when I took the SATs a million years ago. Yeah, they averaged your scores.
Take it multiple times.
All right. No one's getting out of here without doing some math. Also, I teach math, so I kind of sneak it in. I always sneak math in. So, the SAT is out of 1,600 points. Your reading and your grammar score is combined to a score out of 800. Your math and O calculator and calculator is a score out of 800. But you figured that out, right? Because 800 is scary, right? Okay. So say Johnny gets a 500 on his reading and a 700 on his math the first time he takes the test. He's super stoked, because now he knows that with super scoring, he can basically just fall asleep if he wanted to for the math section, because it doesn't matter what he gets on the math section the next time he takes it. Schools are only going to look at that 700 he got the first time. But he knows that he really needs to put the pedal to the metal on this side. Say he gets a 650. Even though his first set of scores were 1,200 and 1,150, what schools are looking at is a 1,350 total, because they only take the top two.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am.
Do some schools not super score?
Very few schools do not super score the SAT. However, where it gets tricky is in this concept called score choice. Where is a school you're considering applying to, if you don't mind sharing? Bradford. Jamie? Yeah, neither of them do that. Okay. Okay, that's fine. The only one, there are no public Virginia schools that do not participate in score choice. If you have some public Virginia schools on your list, you're safe. And so the only one I know off the top of my head right now is Georgetown. What Georgetown says is, hey, that's cool, you have a 1,350, but we know it took you 2 attempts to get there. And to them, 2 attempts is fine. You start getting up into the 3, 4 area, they're like, So even if after 4 attempts you end up with a 1590, they're like, yeah, but it took you 4 tries to get there. So not super impressive. So what score choice allows you to do, if a school participates in score choice, they say, go ahead, take the test 4 times, but only send us your best 2. So they won't see it unless you send it. So score choice, so I only know Georgetown because of this area, but Stanford also does not participate in score choice. MIT does. Rice University does not participate in score choice in Texas. So it feels a little bit random, but for students who really want to go to those schools, it's a big deal, right? They gotta be very strategic about when they're gonna take those tests. So my friend here who took a December test, if you were applying to a school that does not participate in score choice, you'd have to be super careful about when your next one is. 3 is fine. Usually after that, though, it gets a little bit dicey. And there's no hard and fast rule that says, if you took more than 3, get out of here. there are students who now, because of how the test has changed, 4 is starting to be the new normal, and because of how different each administration of the test is. So that is a very good choice about the super scoring. That is all SAT. The way that the ACT is scored is a little bit different. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why when I had the option of taking the ACT when I was overseas, I graduated high school in Lima. That was our last post before I graduated high school. They offered the ACT, but I was like, oh, it's only out of 36 points. That sounds like it's an easy test. I don't want to take. I want to take the SAT. Big mistake. Someone should have taken the ACT, but that's okay. The ACT is scored, as I said, in English, math, reading, and science. And they're each out of 36 points. And the way they do that is they take a raw score of the number of questions and they scale it essentially to a 36. Johnny takes the test the first time and gets 25 across the board. He has a composite score of 25 because it's 25 times 4 over 4, so it's an average. It's harder to move your ACT score because of the fact that it is an average. In order to really push your score up, you'd have to pull things up in one direction, and if the other one drops, it's a little bit harder to balance it. So the strategy is a little bit more challenging, but it's like I said at the beginning, the questions are not challenging, you just have to do them very quickly and hope that it doesn't get too hard later on down the road. That composite is no longer 25. So for particular schools, so thank you for asking that because I actually have a handout for that, which is here. The ACT did not used to be a test that believed in, loved super scoring, but more and more schools have decided they're going to, including MIT, Stanford, Harvard, some of these bigger schools that people would think, well, why would they super score? That seems a little bit silly. Part of it is certainly because they're recognizing the toll that testing does take on some of our families, so I'm glad they're starting to do that. So this list is fairly long. And the way that they super score the ACT is you have your 2 testing administrations and they compile a new composite with only your highest scores across all 4 areas. So that's how that works.
How many times do you take it?
You can take either test up to 12 times total. I wouldn't recommend it. I've had 2 students who have done it. They said it didn't actually help. I'm actually not shocked at all. But 12 times in a year, in a school year. But students, I usually say not more than 4. After that, you're just kind of hoping that the test is easy enough that with your experience, you'll get the score you're looking for.
So on the ACT, you will, let's say you took it 3 times,
Yes.
for example, but they would pick out the top score from each of the 4 categories and give you a composite score? Is that how they?
And typically, they will, so the way they mitigate that is they only take it out of 2. So if you anyone in here part of a team, whether that's sports or debate? Debate's a team. What's for team? Swimming. Awesome. Any after school activities for you? No? What do you do? She's like, wait, what? That's awesome.
Robotics club / campus and MUN and April.
So not quite seasonal. I'm trying to think of things that are more. So swimming is certainly seasonal, but okay. So the reason I ask those questions is because the dates for each of these exams alternates. So for more of my athletes, this becomes an issue because football, forget about it in the fall. No one's taking tests, no one's studying because you're at practice until 5, 6 at night, Friday night lights, and then Saturday, all that stuff. And my baseball students, the opposite in the spring, so they're all fall testers. So I will give you a quick list here. And one for everyone who already knows that there's a December SAT, right? There's also a December ACT. So for ACT, and I'm starting at the beginning of the school year. There is a test that takes place in the first week of September. Then there is a test at the end of October. Nothing in November. And then second week of December. In the new year, the first test is in February, the second week. Then you have April. Last year was great because the April ACT was in the first weekend of spring break. So all these students had signed up, but then they decided, oh, I'm going to go on my college tours because it's spring break. And then they missed their ACT, which was very sad. April, and then June, second week of June. And starting this coming school year, there will be a mid-July ACT. I'm actually very excited about this July ACT because I think for especially a lot of my athletes, this is going to be a great option because that's off season. It's also great because it will then allow you to know how to figure this out, especially for students who are applying early decision or early action. This is a great extra opportunity to get, usually September is the last one that students get because this is October 22nd, 28th. That's a little too close to the November 1 deadline for a lot of early action schools. So that's ACT. From the beginning of the school year, technically, since we start in August, that is the first one of the year now. So that's end of August, August 25th, 26th-ish. Nothing in September. October first weekend. November first weekend. December first weekend. In the new year, there used to be a January test. It is no longer there because they started this August SAT. So now, the next one is March, which you already know because you're getting ready for your next one, I'm sure, right? It's a pretty big gap for a lot of students. Could be good because you get a good 2 months to really know what your score was here if that's going to be your first one, to then prep for this one. One of the challenges, however, with this March SAT is it's incredibly popular for a lot of other students who are like, oh, this is going to be my first one. So finding your testing site, did you take your test at your school? Was it at your school?
Yeah.
Okay, the March one probably won't be though.
No, I haven't really.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So students think, oh, like my school has signed me up or it's going to be at my school. Not necessarily. I also teach in Loudoun, so I had a lot of students who go to like Riverside. The nearest testing center for them was Herndon High School. So they had to come all the way in at 8 o'clock in the morning when everybody else is going to the same school. So it really depends on that aspect of it. So March, then there is May, and then there is June, and now that is it. So this is first weekend June, first weekend May. So again, sort of depending on what your needs are, kind of nice flippy flop, especially in the spring, it's very flippy floppy. Yeah, the ACT tends to be like second to middle of the month and SAT right at the beginning of the month. Any of my friends who have started looking at schools that know if the school they are applying to highly recommends or requires SAT subject exams? Do you want to go into robotics, engineering?
Yeah.
Okay, so you probably will. Any school that you apply to for a program, they're going to want physics or math. Kind of a thing. There are some schools that say, well, if you took the ACT, it's got a science section, so you don't need subject test scores. So that's one thing to think Anyone else thinking about some sort of specialty field like that? Medicine, nursing? Like, I'm just trying to get through the day. I don't know what I'm doing. So the reason I bring that up is because SAT subject exams are great, even though it's a little bit extra. If you are taking AP Bio, AP Chem, AP World, or AP US History, the subject exams are basically a 1 hour exam of your AP class. So you've already studied for it, you don't really need to do much extra. That said, you may not take a subject test the same day you're signed up for an official test. So if you need SAT subject exams for your schools, now you have to really be careful of where you're taking your test. A, it pushes students to say, all right, well, I've got to get a really good score the first time. Because if you're getting, if you take your subject test, you end up, and those are also out of 800. For anyone else who's familiar, those used to be the SAT 2s. That's what they were when I took them. That said, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to score in that 600-700 range the first time. Some students they've taken AP World, they take the World subject test and they get a 550. And that's not a score worth sending. So now they have to plan another date to take it again, which now compounds with the SAT you need to take possibly again, right? There's a lot of planning that goes into that, right? The March test date, there are no subject exams offered, which is why it's such a popular test date. So a lot of students take the March one because they know they can't take subject tests anyway. So that's a good SAT date. Then, depending on the subject you want, is there anyone in this room, I know one person already, is there anyone in this room that speaks a second language either close to fluently or fairly fluently? Okay? What language? Okay.
French.
Awesome. There are language subject tests which are great for colleges because that's, sure, you take Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4, French 1, 2, 3, 4, that's great, you got A's in the courses, but the 1 hour test is a comprehensive look of everything you've learned. I took the Spanish subject test when I was in Lima. We'd already been living in Latin America for 9 years at that point. I just walked in, took the test, walked out 790, no problem, right? Not terribly difficult. It's grammar, there's a listening portion. The reason I bring that up, so there's French, there's Spanish, there's Korean, there's Latin. There are 12 different languages that you can test in, which is pretty cool. There's Farsi, which I think is awesome. That said, these languages are the language tests are only offered certain times of year, typically November, which is challenging if you're applying somewhere early action or early decision, because that deadline is November 1st, and this test is usually November 3rd. So it definitely behooves you, if you know you may want to add that in there. You can write on your applications, I plan on taking a language test, so that will come later. They won't not accept double negatives, are terrible. They will still accept your application even if you're waiting on this test date. Okay.
Question, if you're fluent in a language, can't you just take it at any time?
Absolutely.
If you want to?
Absolutely.
Is there a, I guess, an expiration or something like that? It's not. You just take it one time, just says, hey, you're fluent, and that's it.
Yep. My scores are still valid and they're 11 years old,
So we can take it at 9th grade if we wanted to, and if we pass, then we're good to go.
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%. The only reason I mark November is because there's listening and grammar only. So again, if you know you're more of an I'm totally an auditory learner. It's mostly how I learned Spanish, and then of course I did the grammar portion in school. But I wanted to take the version with listening because I knew my score would be better.
On the SAT, but
Yes.
for the rest of your test you're taking, can you do the rest of your testing as ACT?
Absolutely.
So you can mix it?
All it's doing is adding to your application profile. This is the only way for 90% of these schools that colleges are getting to know you. They haven't known you for the last 18 years, and they've got all this stuff on paper. So the more that you can give them to look at that tells them more about who you are, the higher your chances are of being accepted to that particular college. Yes, sir.
Is there a language test for the ACT?
There is not. There is not. And because of the range, you have the English and the reading and the math and the science, they feel, which is why I mentioned, so Georgetown is one of those schools where they require 3 subject exams. You must submit 3 different subject tests to apply. But they say, but if you took the ACT, you don't need them because these are 4 different subjects. So it just depends on the school. Great question. Yes.
So if you take AP exams, is it just adds to your portfolio, or do you
Yes.
not need? Okay.
Yes, it certainly does. So the AP exams are more for helping you get credit in college. Yes, it's great on the transcript, but the way they use it is to say you don't have to take Bio 101 or Physics 101 or something like that. But the AP exam itself is optional. The way you're getting into the college is your grade on in the actual class. The grade on the test helps them figure out if you can test out of a certain course.
Does the same thing apply for like language tests?
Yes, you must take higher level exam if you're gonna club out though. That's one of the biggest rubs that I found with that, because I took IB math standard level and I got a 6 on the exam, but they're like, but it wasn't higher level math. I was like, you have no idea how hard IBSL math is. IBHL is also obviously very difficult, but yeah, but it's the same for IB. Most schools, if you go to the college websites, they will have a list of test types that they accept for equivalencies in certain courses.
So usually you can't kind of replace a course if you have an SL, you can only do it.
Typically not. Yeah, they're starting to change it, which is why I mentioned the college fair for Washington Lee. You can ask those questions of those schools. They're starting to get more on board with the fact that, hey, all of IB is very hard, so it's not just taking higher level courses. So for SL, they're starting to say you have to get a 7 on the SL exam, but for HL, they're starting to allow you to do 6 or 7. They used to say only 7s on HL is the only way to get out of a class, which is like impossible, right? And the only class I did that in was Spanish B. I got a 7 on that test, and that was not a challenge. But so those would be great questions to ask the colleges that come in for clapping. I don't know if Annandale has those, but no, very good questions on that front. Cool. So that's timeline. We talked about seasons. We talked about number of times you can, should, want to take a test. Any other questions in that sphere or anything I haven't talked about yet? Information. Now to the slight portion that's very unique to you guys. Who thinks they're heading out before senior year? Anyone going back over or out? Or any younger siblings that are floating around that may be over event year, but maybe you're not sure. Okay. Okay. So mom and dad may be going overseas again. Okay. So of course you have these things here. From the research that I've done, and certainly Becky Grappo, who comes and does that awesome college workshop, one of the things we've noticed, and even, like I said, even when I was overseas, they don't have this, even at the American schools. You get to talk to the guidance counselor while you're there, who's knowledgeable in these areas, and they'll get to explain how some of these things work, but there are no after-school SAT prep classes, there's no, there's certainly online stuff, and depending on where you are, online might be a little iffy, right? Like I worked with a young lady who was at ISK in Kenya, and we were just having a lot of trouble with the connection. It's just harder when you're out in areas like that. But how does this work? So not all dates, not all tests are offered. There are certain areas where the ACT isn't even offered. So depending on where you're going, you would want to look at that. Second, not all of these dates are available. One of the biggest challenges that the SAT in particular has been having is test hacking, and China is at the top of that list. That said, even so, if you are stationed somewhere and there's a test hack, those scores are canceled. They don't count. So the student has to take them again. So part of why we do the timeline planning is, hey, that's stuff you can't account for. I had a young woman in Chile that I worked with. They had a really bad earthquake a year ago, the weekend of her test, and she's like, and my school only does December and May. They don't even do March. So now I gotta wait all this time. So how does that affect your prep and, you know, motivation and all those other things? So one of the things I always stress for families that are getting ready to go over that are either now or someone coming up is paying attention to the timeline. Certainly political climate. When we lived in India, there were a few instances where some folks had to be evacuated. Sometimes that's a reality that some of these students will have to face. Just understanding where you're going, what may come up, and being able to talk to your student about, you know what, we're going to do our best to hold to this, and this isn't about me trying to make you be more, you know, you have to be more responsible. It's just this is the reality, and I want you to feel like you can be successful because there are things we can't control. So that's one of the things that I always talk about, especially with this population. It's very different, right? I don't say this to kids at Washington and Lee maybe because there's a lot of those kids, but James Madison, I'm not saying that at that school necessarily. So, great. With regard to being overseas, I think that's it for that. The last piece that I think is very helpful for this particular community is the following. And before I get into that, I'm going to ask, where was your last post? Havana?
Guadalajara.
That's right, I remember.
Brussels. Zagreb.
I'm sorry?
Zagreb.
Zagreb, okay. I was like, what?
Geneva.
Nice. Okay. Different parts of the world. And that is something that you guys are bringing to the table. That yes, there are more and more. So when I came out of the Foreign Service, there were a good number of us, but it was still fairly small. There are more of you in that sense, but one of the most important things to remember is from having been overseas, and even though you go to the American school or even the local school, you're still getting a different type of education than you were. And I forgot to ask, I'm so sorry, where was your last post? South Korea, okay, I'm so sorry. So you are getting a different type of education. When I work with TCKs, whether they're military or foreign service, some students find that when they're sitting down to take these tests, they feel like it's harder to look at the material and see its importance. When you take a school test, you're like, yes, I learned the material in school, I'm gonna sit down, the teacher's gonna tell me what's on it, I study it, and that's how I get my A, right? These tests are not necessarily designed to reflect that. It's more, these tests are more so designed to see how resourceful are these students, can they think on their feet, and do they know how to follow directions? The vast majority of my TCK students are very creative, very innovative. Students who want to do more than what's in front of them because they know more about what's out there. And that can be really hard when you're being put in this box for this test. It has nothing to do with your intelligence. It has more to do with where your brain is. And your brain is changing at this age. My background's in developmental psych. And so one of the things I look at is how students' brains are changing over the course of, anyone taking AP Psych this year? No? Oh, it's a great class. But your brain is changing, but you guys have a different experience than the vast majority of the other young men and women in your class. And so I do want to stress, I always want to take the time to stress that if you feel like you're struggling with these exams, it's not because you don't know what you're doing or you're not smart. You're just coming from a different place. And sometimes just that realization and that understanding that it is a little bit harder for you because of that. It's one of the reasons why the SAT changed. I sat down and did the old SAT and they were asking me questions about the American Revolution. I was like, I was a lifer. I grew up overseas my entire life. I took one US history class. I don't know anything about US history. So the test was very much skewed to students who were taking courses here and had that culture and that background. And if you're overseas, you don't necessarily know that. So if you use one type of book and you're like, yeah, I'm using, and I'm just throwing a name out there, I'm not naming anybody, but Kaplan, right? So you do a bunch of work out of the Kaplan book, and you're getting, you know, for SAT, like, oh man, I keep getting like 1,400 in the Kaplan books, this is great. Then you sit the real thing and you're like, I got a 1250, what just happened, right? When you practice one thing in a particular way, you get good at that one thing. You're not necessarily getting good at the suite of items. And so part of why I have these particular books is because they're focused on specific aspects of the test. These are two of my favorite math books that have SAT and ACT because of how they're broken down. So you're practicing skills, not the test itself. Anything that has the full-length exams, which is why you have official tests in front of you and why I pass around those books. And this also goes for folks who may be getting ready to go overseas again. The books that are made by the companies are the best investment you can make because they are written by the people who've written the tests, they know what they're doing, and it's going to have a much better reflection of what you will get on test day than that. So what was your question? I promise I wasn't ignoring you.
Oh no, it had to do with the book. I'm like, that's kind of concerning.
Right?
It's my book. Nah.
That one's okay. The Princeton Review's getting a little bit better with that sort of stuff. I love this Princeton Review book because again, it's just question types. It's not always full-length exams. It's mostly like drills and things like that. For that kind of stuff, it's okay because you're learning about where commas go and the difference between subject and object and all these other things. That's always very helpful because those are skills you need on the test. But if you're going to sit down and say, I want to know what my score is at this point, I want to take a full-length exam, don't touch those books. Pick up the blue book, all 8 of those practice tests, totally fine. And then for the ACT, it is the red book, okay? They're cheaper on Amazon than they are on the actual websites. I think the College Board book on College Board is like $27, and on Amazon it's like $13. All right, I made that easy. Cool. So if anyone has any particular questions about other books that they can use to prep with, always happy to answer, because most of you are juniors, so I'm happy to answer those questions, because there's going to be in your guidance counselor's office on the bookshelves, they have books that you can look at to practice, and then in the library they have the same thing, but they're mostly Kaplan, Princeton Review, Barron's. For some stuff it's helpful, for some stuff it's not. So I just wanted to start there to let folks know that that's why everything that's in front of you that I provide are from official writings of the test. So this is stuff that is going to be 99.9% closest to what you're going to see on an actual exam, because that's the most helpful. Cool? Cool. All right, so let's get this off the board. I have my eraser.
You can use that clock that's right there, Jessica.
I can. Huzzah.
If you like.
You had the agenda on the board or something. Sitting here explaining it. Okay. Question number 1. Who in here is signed up for their first or next official exam, whether that's SAT or ACT? Which test are you getting ready to sit? February?
Yes.
Nobody else. Has anyone other than my friend in the back who has already taken a test? Why?
Not that
Why? That's okay. The other thing I want to make sure my friends understand is that the friend who took, so I have a few juniors who took their tests in September and August and as juniors because they wanted to get it over, whatever, those are those friends. I have other friends that are waiting until October of their senior year to take it. That's also fine. The most important thing about getting prepared for these tests is taking it at a time where A, you feel like you understand the material for the most part, but B, also at a time where you're much more zen, okay? You cannot come into a standardized test and sit for 3.5, 4 hours when your mind's not there. It's a waste of time. I had a last round for December. Student came in, he was ready, he'd been studying for a while. He walked up to the registration table and said, oh, I'm also taking the essay. And they're like, well, you're not on the list. And automatically his brain was completely shut down. He came out, his score wasn't where he wanted it to be, even though he'd been doing very well in practice, but it's just, in that one instant, it changed his entire outlook. So that's the next part before we get into this about what I want to make sure folks feel like they have heard. Take it when you feel ready, okay, and when you have time. So about 3 AP classes, how many for you? 1?
Just 2 honors classes.
Oh, right, got it. So you don't have AP. So do you guys mix and match AP and IB at all? No. Some people do, and that's totally fine. So if you have several AP classes, May is off the table if you're taking the SAT, because it's right in the middle of AP exam week. So if you have like AP Psych, AP whatever, those are all like May 1st, May 2nd, that's fine because it's early. But all like AP Calc, all that other stuff, it's in that second week, it's after AP Chem, all that stuff, it's after the exam. You guys, you don't take your test till next year, so it doesn't matter, right? So that's an example of take it when you have time and when you're ready. For your AP classes, you're gonna be spending pretty much from March to May doing nothing but preparing for the test. AP Lang? Yes. Yeah, so you're gonna be doing rhetorical analyses for the next 4 months, basically. You'll be so sick of writing it now. Cool. So after this chat, is there anyone who's sort of feeling like they think they know which test they're gonna go with, more or less? Or at least when they came in the room, they were like, this is probably the test I'm taking. Okay, what did you think? Okay. Oh, you already took an SAT. So maybe after December, do you feel like you're gonna stick with it, or do you wanna try something different?
No, I think I'll stick with ACT. Sorry, SAT.
Anyway, what do you think? Okay, and that's totally fine. That's part of why I'm offering this course, is because the most time gets spent for students, because of how much the tests have changed, is figuring out, well, which test suits me better. And you don't really have a lot of time to kind of like guess, figure it out. You're doing a lot of other stuff on top of it, right? So here's what we're going to do. So, how many sections does the SAT have? And now I actually get to learn some of your names. I know some of you, but not all of you. Your name, my friend? In the back. Camila? Cool. Camila, do you know how many sections the SAT has? 2. What 2? Which 2? Sorry, which 2? Cool. Your name, my friend.
Valerie.
Valerie. How many sections on the ACT? 4. Do you know what they are?
Yes.
Okay.
English, reading, math, science.
Not necessarily that. Okay. Front and back. Name?
Alex.
Alex.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I break this down any further?
Yeah, so the math is in the calculator and the non-calculator section.
Okay.
And
How about
then
reading?
The reading is in the, reading section, I guess, writing section.
Wait. You said writing. So that's the essay?
Well, okay, it has the reading section and it has the, grammar
Oh.
section, I guess.
Weird, right? Because I definitely get that question. People say, oh, so the essay's in the middle. I'm like, well, why would they call it writing if you're not actually doing any writing? We'll talk a little bit about that, but I call it the grammar section. But on the test, they call it writing and language. Cool. All right, so, I mean, they both technically have 4 sections, but they sort of span very different skill sets. Now, honest show of hands, does no calculator sound scarier? And I'm a math person and it's scarier to me, okay? that is definitely going to be one of the factors. I mean, I sort of said that earlier, right? But that's going to be one of the factors for you. If really not having a calculator, even if the math is easier, if really not having a calculator is an issue, that's going to be something to think about when you make your decision for SAT versus ACT. Okay? I've been avoiding it because I can't remember your name. I feel like a total jerk. I'm so sorry. Can you remind me of your name and then I'll take your question? Emma. I almost said Gemma, but go ahead. What was your question?
For the ACT, does the math section allow a calculator?
Yes, the entire section gets a calculator. Good question. Emma, do you know how much time you get for the reading? Way more than that.
An hour.
Yes. Does anyone know how much time you get on the PSAT for the reading? I mean, you guys, well, you didn't just take it, but you kind of just got them back.
Like 30 minutes.
No, it's hard now still, but that's okay.
45.
Right? And these are the things that I feel like students aren't always considering. One of the hardest parts about this test is, yes, it does take a while, but I mean, I have children and I lose track of time all the time for different reasons than you guys do. The reading comprehension section on the SAT is 65 minutes long. Alex, can you remember the last time you sat down just for 1 hour and 5 minutes doing one academically related thing?
Probably taking like practice SAT on the computer.
Right?
Yeah.
But other than that, like even in school, who's on a block schedule for school? Okay, 90-minute course classes, more or less. Are you doing stuff for the whole 90 minutes? Okay. Are you doing the same thing, or are you like looking at the board, doing a little bit of work, and then maybe some group work, a little bit of back and forth? But it's broken up, right? You have to sit and read and answer questions for 65 minutes. That's all you're doing, right? So Valerie, I know you're a little more acquainted with the ACT. Do you remember how much time you get for reading on the ACT?
Yes, I think it's 45 minutes,
Close, a little bit lower.
a little bit lower. Is it 30?
35.
35?
That's okay. That's a pretty big difference. This is the reading comprehension section of the ACT. This is the reading comprehension section of the SAT. Now, if you're not really a reader, that might be another thing you have to think about. Is the SAT really the right test for me if I don't feel like I can sit for an hour and 5 minutes and read passages and answer questions? Then the other aspect is, you know what? Yeah, I don't really love reading, but I'm not a fast reader. The reading on the ACT has 4 passages, and you have 40 questions to answer. On the SAT, you have 5 passages and 52 questions to answer. That is really not a lot of time, especially for the level of reading that you're doing. Are you taking IB English, Camilla? Did you do a lot of reading in that class? So again, it's part of why, you know, when I talk about this particular group, I mean, IB is very popular in a lot of the overseas schools that you end up in, and so I felt really prepared for the reading because I was reading some pretty intense stuff. But the questions I was answering felt a little bit nonsensical, and that's part of why I mentioned, like, some of this test it just feels weird. Like, why are you asking me that? And why are you asking me in that way? That just seems so weird. The ACT is very quick. It's a little bit more straightforward, but I mean, this is tough. 35 minutes. So that's another aspect to think about. One thing that's not really going to sway students one way or the other are the English/grammar sections because they're identical on both tests. The only difference is where they end up. On the SAT, it's section 2. There are 44 questions, and you have 35 minutes to complete it. The English on the ACT is section 1. You have 45 minutes and 75 questions. Now, Agnes is looking at me and he said, well, wait a minute, you said they were identical and those numbers are not the same. What are you talking about? It's totally what you were thinking, right? They're identical in their format. So if you've seen the PSAT section 2, the grammar section, that's exactly what an ACT grammar section looks like. Same types of questions, same sort of layout, the little underline with the number and you fix it, no change, it's all the same. And that's because the SAT stole it from the ACT. Stole is a very harsh word. They asked permission to use their slightly superior format. The way the English used to be tested on the SAT was you got these it was one sentence with a couple of things underlined. And in that sentence, you had to figure out what was wrong with it. But you had no context, you just had a sentence. So unless the verb tense was wrong, it was really hard to figure out what was actually wrong with that, unless you were a true grammarian. But that was one of the biggest complaints, was that, well, I have no context to answer this question, how do I know that that verb is actually right? So, that's why they changed it. Cool. Students tend to have the least amount of trouble with those sections. It's pretty straightforward. So let's delve a little bit deeper here in the math. Valerie, how much time and how many questions?
60 minutes, 60 questions.
Which means, Emma, how much time do I get per question?
1.
The math no calculator, Alex, do you remember how much time you get?
I think it's maybe 35, I'm not really sure.
A little bit lower.
30,
A little more.
25?
There you go. When in doubt, go down in increments of 5. I like that. And how many questions?
I want to say like 25 or 30.
That's this one. This one's 20.
Okay.
You're the only person whose name I don't have. So on paper, Lily, which one looks better? The no calculator, 25 minutes for 20 questions, or the whole math section here, 60 minutes for 60 questions? Totally, right? But that's, again, part of why we're doing this is if you figure out how that works for you, you're much better off. It gets better. The calculator section is 55 minutes, but you only have to answer 38 questions. Again, on paper, you're just like, wow, why would people not pick that? There's so much more time. Questions are kind of tough. Are you in AP Calc?
No, pre-cal.
Pre-Calc, okay. So I'm just totaling it up now. So it's 80 minutes of math for 58 questions. So if we're really doing a side-by-side comparison here, that just looks so much better, right? That scares a lot of students. Like, oh my God, I only get a minute per question. I don't think. Did anyone do bad minutes in elementary school and middle school? I totally did those. Those are my faves. But that brings back, for some people, they're like, no, those are terrible memories. I never want to relive them. That's what it feels like. What's even better is on paper for the math section, it really only goes to Algebra 2 trig. First semester of pre-calculus. For ACT math, you need a whole year. You need almost a full year of pre-cal, which is the biggest difference. But you can get by with like a 700 only in Algebra 2. You don't need trig. But to really get a good math score on the ACT, you pretty much have to be in pre-cal in that sense. Or have at least been exposed to the topics in that. So again, a little bit easier depending on where you are in your math career, but no calculator. Got to be a little further ahead, but you got your calculator, and it's fast. Is this helping folks sort of feel this out? Differences and what may be working for them? Great, Agnes, what have I not talked about yet? Alright. So a few friends I'm hearing about that are thinking about a science field. So, I don't know, I guess that would mean that anyone who wants to go into a science should take the ACT on paper. So other than Valerie, has anyone else seen a full-length ACT exam before? No? That's okay. And that's why I kept saying, like, PSAT, SAT, you guys are pretty much thrown, you get that thrown at you from the time you're in like 7th, 8th grade. That's all you see. Valerie, can you sort of describe the ACT science section? Do I need to memorize that force equals mass times acceleration, or that alleles have dominant or recessive genes? Like, what do I need to know? That's okay. Which feels weird. Like, this says science. Why isn't it just like you memorize science things? Well, it's because that's not what the science section does. The science portion of the ACT is basically a reading section with graphs. All it is. Graphs, charts, some basic math, like you have to know that 9 is about double of 4, maybe a little bit more. You're not allowed to use a calculator, so you are using approximations. You should know how to do scientific notation. You know what it looks like anyway. Basic math. Forgot to finish that off. The biggest challenge with this section and why it's difficult is not, again, it's not because of the material, and it gets scary because here's the short list of subjects on the ACT science section. There is biology, there is physics, there is chemistry, there is astronomy, astrophysics, geology. So that's like earth science from 7th grade. This is why it scares people. They're like, I have to remember that sediment and rock are different, and no, you don't have to know anything. The science section is how quickly can you read data that's given to you and make an assertion about it from a graph. Hard part, 35 minutes, 40 questions, and you don't know how many passages you get from test to test. They mix it up. Sometimes there's 6, sometimes there's 7, but you don't know. Not until you take it. It also comes at the end of the test. So you burn through 45 minutes of English, 60 minutes of pretty brain-pounding math, 35 minutes of reading, and now you get to do the science. Across both exams, stamina is important. This is more about burning out, like kind of like spark and fizzle. And this is how long can you keep your candle lit for. So I think about this as like you've got your candle, it's lit, and how long until, like, because it melts really, really slowly, like can you outlast that? And this is like a firecracker. Like how quickly does it go off?
On the topics of time, I heard there's breaks.
Certainly. I'm not doing that all at once. Sit in. It's actually psychologically, it's not possible. So, there are breaks. There is a single 10-minute break here between the reading and the grammar. You got that?
Yeah.
Okay. when choosing, if you decide or your parents decide to engage the services of somebody to help you with this and give you practice tests, watch out for people who give you the break between grammar and math. They're doing it wrong. You can't do 65 minutes of reading and 35 minutes of grammar in one sitting. That's why they split it up, okay? So you get one break here and one break here. So you get your 2 35 and 20, this is fine, right? Just do those back to back. But you get the big breaks by the book-ended 65 and 55 minute passes. Yes?
How long is it?
Yes, this one, they're both usually 10. How long were your breaks? Do you remember?
I think one was 10, one was 5. I think the first one was 10.
Yeah. I hear differing reports because on the official, so you can actually look up on either College Board, Google, whatever, you can look it up and you can find the official proctor guide, like the one that the proctors, when they come in the room, that they have to read and memorize when they sit down with you. In that book, it says this one's 15 minutes. Some people do 10, some people do 5. And the College Board and ACT are not monitoring how schools administer the test. So if you have a proctor that's sitting up at the front, popping her chewing gum while she's doing stuff and looking out the window, tapping her pencil, nothing you can do. Can't write to College Board and complain about it. There's got to be something pretty egregious for them to want to cancel scores or give you a do-over. Something I think that when students walk in, they expect sort of this perfect testing environment. December is usually pretty okay. It's hectic getting in because there's a lot of students, but it's pretty orderly. You get to the room and sit down. Some test dates are a little bit crazier than others. Like August this year was madness because it was the first time they were offering it, and some schools forgot to open because in Montgomery County, we were closed until September for the first time. So 2 schools opened late because they forgot they had school event. But so that would be a situation where College Board would say, okay, you get a do-over, you get a free second administration or something like that. But it has to take something like that to work it out. For the ACT, your break comes here. And that's it. I've heard, no, because I haven't heard of anyone getting the break after English. Sometimes I've seen one in here, but not too often. But there's definitely one between math and reading, 100%. Breezing through a lot of material. Any questions so far about anything that I've said? Yes, sir.
How much easier are the ACT questions than the SAT questions?
That's an awesome question. You have an ACT in front of you in your green or pink folder. And in the folder are a math and a reading section, section 2 and section 3. You now know where the math comes in for the SAT. You have a full-length SAT in front of you. SAT 5 was the May of 2016 official exam. So if you have a sibling or a friend or whatever that took that test, that's the test they took. About taking these tests again is this realization that it isn't 100% about what you know. It's knowing the format of the test, how it's scored, and how to maximize your score based on a combination of those things. So students who are getting 100%, 90% in their AP Calculus course aren't necessarily acing the math section every time. I've had a few students, I've said it, I don't know if people heard it, but I have students in AP Calculus who are getting really great grades or got a 5 on the AP exam who can't break 600 on the math section of the SAT, which is like average-ish. So, cool. So, let's see, 6, 2, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2s, starting with Lily. So 1, 2.
1, 2.
All right. Okay, so there's 2 2s back there. So my last 2. So Agnes and Emma are just going to switch seats. So, I was asked an awesome question before we went out on break about, you know, when we're talking about like how hard is this test compared to this test really, or how are we really comparing this, I want to give everybody an opportunity to explore that a little bit more, because the strategies that you develop in improving your score on this test is going to depend on how difficult you find certain aspects of the test. So if you have some of the math questions and you're like, you know what, I can do a fair amount of the algebra questions, but I'm not really sure how to approach some of these trig questions because they're scary or I don't know how to do them. Again, yes, you may need a little bit of background, but again, because of how the tests are designed, there are strategies that you can use to find the answer fairly quickly without actually knowing very much about it at all. There are 5 answers instead of 4. So it takes a little bit longer to get through all the answer choices and you don't have as much time, right? Now what was the one thing I said about how they ordered the answer choices, Willie, do you remember? Okay. So if I have this set of numbers and I try 30, because it's in the middle, and it gives me more than what I need, are these guys going to cut it? Nope. Now you've only got 2 to try. So that's the variation for the ACTs, because they have exactly, but you can't really do that with the SAT, but you can definitely do it with the ACT. And you'll find there are particular questions you can do that for, and others it may not work as well, but if you're struggling with a question where you're not sure how to really approach it algebraically, this is a great backup. Cool? Helpful? Awesome. Saying say cool stuff may not be helpful. Awesome. All right. Alex, what was the multiple choice question you chose? It's the graph one.
Yeah, it says f of x equals 2 to the power of x plus 1. And then the function f is defined by the equation above, which following is the graph of y equals negative f of x in the xy plane.
So they don't even want me to pick the graph of this, they want me to find, oh my god.
They want you to find the negative f of x.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. What question number is this?
14.
14. Okay. So again, for the SAT, there's a pretty standard set of questions that are going to be just way more challenging than the other ones. A little bit different from the ACT. So what I was telling my ACT folks is you have a bit of a bell curve. The first 15 to 22 questions are pretty easy. Then they start getting, they're not hard, they're just time consuming, so it slows you down. And then you get some harder questions at the end. But then Valerie got question number 59, the second to last question on the test. And what was it, Valerie? One-third percent.
Yeah, 1/3% of 6, 7.
67. 6 over 7. Oh, 6 over 7. What is 1/3% of 6 over 7? So if you don't feel like you're a percentages person, this may not help you feel very, feel much better, but I would much rather try this one than that one, right? But so they kind of bell curve it. They don't really do that on the SAT. It's just all the way up. Easy to hard. ACT, you can feel pretty confident at the very end there are going to be questions you can answer. So your strategy for approaching SAT math versus ACT math the no calculator section, it's broken down into 20 questions. The first 15 are multiple choice. The final 4 are open response, or free response, I'm sorry. The first 8 of this multiple choice are pretty easy. Every once in a while you get one that kind of throws you off a little bit, but you know, once we did it by plugging in the answers, number 7 or 5 wasn't really that hard. I just had to have the right strategy for approaching it. 9 through 13 are going to be medium. And then 14 and 15, that was that graph crazy question. For the free response questions, 16 and 17 are actually pretty easy. Question number 16 for the free response is going to be like the one I just said. I pulled it from another test. It was if t squared minus 4 is greater than 0, solve for t. T is greater than 2, feel pretty good about that one. 18 through 20. One of the things to understand about these tests is they do evolve over time. And we've now come past the point where we can use like a small set of tests to predict because we just had so many now. At this point, I'm telling students 18 through 20 they're medium to hard. It really depends on the test you get. One time I got a question number 19 that was like, if the square root of a is 100, find a plus 10. I was like, wait, that's question 19? Like, what? And I'm like so ready for it to be hard, and then it wasn't. I'm really annoyed by that. So what I tell students is, especially if you're kind of running low on time, just kind of take a look at these and then pick one, look at the one you're like, I feel comfortable with this one, and just stick with it. Just go with that one question, because one right answer, especially for free response, you don't have options. Just work with that one problem, feeling like, okay, I've got a pretty good chance of getting it right. Does that make sense, guys? Cool. The calculator section for math is similar, but again, I find that students with the calculator section of the SAT, you have a lot more time. The questions aren't as difficult. The no calculator section is the make or break, so that's really where students spend the most time figuring that out. You're in a much better spot with the calculator section, so I'm not getting that one. For ACT math, we already talked about how numbers 1 through 20 are, 15 through 20 are, you know, kind of easy, maybe a little on the medium side. They work you there. 21 through 40 are a mix of medium to hard, and 41 through 60 are medium hard to hard. And every once in a while they toss in an easy one. I wrote that problem on the board earlier, which was what is 1/3% of 6/7? Yes, that's a percentage question and it's fairly easy, but there's more steps than what is 25% of 100. Like most folks can do that one fairly quickly. This one takes a little bit more time, but it's not difficult. Does that make sense? So Emma's thinking about, you know, which test she wants to do. She's trying to decide between SAT or ACT, and she feels like math is not her best subject, which is okay. They have to know that going into college, right? So either test is going to challenge you in a different way. Is your strategy going to be different from someone who feels like math is actually their strong suit? How are you going to approach maybe SAT math? Give me an example.
I'll take maybe more time like finding an answer to like figuring it out, going slowly through the problem.
Okay. And you have the time to do that. You have 20 minutes 25 minutes, I'm sorry, for 20 questions. So you have about a minute and 15 seconds for every question. And here you have exactly 1 minute per question, right? Alex, say I'm not, again, I'm not really a math person, and I know I need to answer all of them to at least try and get points, but where am I putting my energy on the SAT math?
I'd say into the ones you can do, or the one you're the most confident.
Okay, what does that do to my question time ratio?
It gives you, instead of having a minute 15 seconds for the hard ones, then you'll have maybe a minute 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, depending on how fast you're going on the ones you know.
Okay. So if I'm answering every single question I have, this is the ratio I'm working with, 25 to 20. Say I'm like, you know what, that last graph question, whatever, circle something, keep going, right? I'm not really thinking about these. I scratch these out of my mind. I pretend they're not even there. I just bubble something in and I keep going. By removing those two, does my time change?
No.
Yeah. But the number of questions did. It's a win-win either way, because if you guess right, you still get the point. But you also gave yourself more time for questions you feel much more confident about. That's part of the reason why I keep saying, like, it's really hard to get like a 450 or below in math. It's really hard. You have to try. But for students who feel like when they're really, Valerie, what do you think you might try if you feel like math is not your strong suit? English? Oh, in the math section. So you're in the math
Oh, in the
section.
math section.
Yes, yes, yes. You have to do the English section. You can't just not take it. I wish. I would only do math and science if I were allowed to, but. So I'm in the math portion. I've started it. I don't feel incredibly confident, but I do know how the test questions are sort of broken up. If I'm trying to maximize my score without stressing myself out, what might I do with the questions? Like, how would I strategize about approaching them, do you think?
I don't know, just like go through regularly. It's already in order from easiest, like middle hard, slash hard. So I just get through 1 through 20, which should be fairly easy. You can do maybe almost all medium slash hard, and then try to find at least some that you can do in the medium hard slash hard. Or put more of your time, focus, and energy on the ones that you know, and then make an educated guess on the rest of them that you don't know.
My personal view is that both of these tests are more rewarding for students who know how to be resourceful with their time and with information that they're given. Everyone's strategy is going to be different, and how well you know yourself as a student and sort of what your strengths and weaknesses are is going to drive how you maximize your scores. I had a young lady last year, she's a senior now, and she came to me with like an 860 PSAT score, total PSAT. One of the things that I think she did very well was she was very honest with herself about how she was studying, how much time she was putting into it, and what she felt like she could actually do. When she came to me, she said, you know what, math is just really not my thing. I've got to figure something out. So we came up with a way for her to work this in, and after the June SAT, she called me and told me she got 1,400, and her highest score was math. She was so thrilled. She was just so happy, and a lot of it wasn't, helping her become smarter. It was her being honest with herself about what she needed and studying it the right way and sort of figuring it out over time. This is not a one and done endeavor. There's a reason why there are SAT classes that stretch about 3 or 4 months. You don't need that much time, really. If you're being efficient, you don't need that much time. But 3 or 4 months to study just for one test is a lot. 3 or 4 months over a couple of sittings is fine. Like my athletes who come in mid-season and say, hey, I have 2 weeks to the test and I need to get like a 1350. That's not gonna come back next time. If you feel as though there are things that, content-wise you need a little bit more help with, that's part of why I had those books. There's a lot of content that you probably, especially for English, like the grammar, knowing where commas go, and the difference between a subject and an object in a sentence. It's pretty quick to pick up on, but then practicing it in the context of the test is super helpful. Let's see, I think there was one more thing I wanted to talk about, and now I'm blanking on it. But so far, does this feel good? We're feeling okay with this? Oh, now I remember what it was. Okay, so I'm leaving these 2 things on the worksheet. For English on both of these sections. SAT English is section 2, and it's a series of passages with a few things under. I mean, everyone's taking the PSAT, they know what it looks like, right? Do you need to read the whole thing if the one piece is underlined? So it's, you got this, and then you got this little underline, says 1, and then there's one over here, and says, what's option A always? No change. And then B is, right? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I just go to 1 and, right? Wrong. You said you swim.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that mean you're a diver?
No.
But you said you swim, that's water, and you're in it. Diving and swimming are. So how do I know you're a swimmer and what you're actually doing? What else can you tell me?
I swim a lot.
Okay. You're giving me context, right? You can't answer these 1, 2, 3 at a time if you don't know what else is happening. So one of the reasons why students English score on both tests, because again, they're the same. One of the things to remember is if you approach each question individually like that because you feel like you need to speed through it, you're not going to do as well as you think you did. You have enough time to read the whole passage. You really do. The passages are not challenging, I feel like. If anyone remembers the grammar section, it's like, let's talk about co-working as a career. These are people who, it's not hard, right? It's not like the reading section. Some of those passages are really tough. So for both of them, so I'll put it in the middle, so it's nice middle. You want to read all of the passage. You want to keep in mind that context is the most important thing. You want to remember that less is more. So I know you're an AP Lang. No, you're not. No, okay, so there's the only one in AP Lang, that's fine. But everyone's had an English class where they've written an essay, right? When you came in 9th or 10th grade, you may have done the 3-paragraph essay, and what might be something your teacher writes for your 3-paragraph, 4-paragraph essay that you need to add more details, and that you need to have, you can't say nice, say wonderful or beautiful. The SAT and the ACT do not care about any of that. If you mean nice, say nice. If you say due to the fact that, no, they don't want any of that. If you could say because, say because. Don't say due to the fact, don't say the reason that, therefore that. They don't want that. Less is more. Yes?
Does that apply also on the essay portion for the essay?
Ooh, good question. So the essay is different because it is a rhetorical analysis essay, which for you would be, for IB, it's an internal assessment paper, like a paper 1. So you actually want to write a little bit more, but you want to make sure you have substance. You don't want to write fluff. They can see through fluff. Okay?
So you still need to use like the words that you mean, not like.
You should certainly say the words that you mean, but you don't want to go off topic or anything like that, just to add more word count. Don't want to do that. Okay, so less is more. And relevance is important. Does anyone here watch a sport on TV? No? Wow, yeah, usually I have at least one answer to that one, so now we know where to go. Okay, let's talk about it this way then. Ooh, okay. Who here likes puppies? Okay, cool, there we go. All right, Aida, so I'm going to ask you a question. I would like for you to please respond either yes or no. Then I'm going to ask you why, and I would like you to tell me why. Cool. Would you like for me to give you a puppy?
No,
Why not?
because my parents would not want me to have one.
Okay? Now, I would like you to please ask me the exact same question, and then I'll tell you all that stuff. So whatever I just did, back to you. Go ahead.
Would you like me to give you a puppy?
Yes,
Why?
because puppies have brown ears. Right? What? Is it untrue that puppies have brown ears? Sometimes. Okay. What's the difference between my answer to why and Aguilas's answer to why, Camilla? They are certainly both subjective, because he didn't have to answer about his parents. He could say, well, because puppies poop and I don't want poop. Like, I don't know. He could have said anything. But the response to his question was relevant to the question I was asking. My answer is true, but not true for the situation that I'm in. That's why context is so important and why you can't answer the questions without it. So that's just one example. Okay? Helpful distinction between the two things, right? Because again, you're taught in your essay classes to just write more. You need, well, they need to know that, and what if they don't? That's the grammar section. Helpful? Cool. Reading, we already know, is vastly different on both tests. And anyone remind me how much time we get on the SAT?
65.
I know it sounds kind of silly that I keep asking that, but like I said, how much time you get is important, because if you don't know how much time you spend doing something, you don't know how to pace yourself. And pacing is very important, especially on the ACT. You need to be able to pace yourself. There are 5 different types of passages on the SAT. So I get approximately 13 minutes, I get exactly, actually, I'm sorry, 13 minutes per passage. The ACT gives me 35 minutes, and I have 4 passages, which is around, 8 minutes and 45 seconds. So Willie, I get 13 minutes to read everything, right? That's all I have to do. Oh, what else do I have to do?
Answer the question.
Okay, well, that's not too bad, 13 minutes. So I could probably split this, maybe depending on how difficult it is. If I love history, maybe the history passage only takes me about 5 minutes, and so I have 8 to really get through some of those questions. Oh boy, I don't even really know where to start with that, right? I get about 4 minutes here for reading, and 4 minutes, that's just, it's really not a lot of time, you guys, right? 4 minutes, 45 seconds to answer questions. Thanks. For SAT reading, I do love that you get more time per passage, but it's really easy to just start glassing, which means you're not really paying attention anymore because it is so long. One of the things that I think is very, very helpful is if you are the type of student who doesn't feel like they can pay attention a lot when they read, I'm gonna write that big A word, here it comes. I know, you can't get away from it, I'm sorry. It's there. Even if you're not really taking in what you're annotating, it gives you something to do, and it does help you pay attention to what you're reading to a certain extent. Now, one of the biggest questions I get is, well, what if I underline something, because you can't highlight, no highlighters, pencils only. No mechanical pencils on the test, they will take them away. One of the things that students ask me is, well, what if I underline something and then they don't ask me about it? You probably will. Focus on people, focus on places, focus on changes in setting, and changes in attitude. You'll find you only end up underlining about 35 to 40% of the passage. There's only 11 questions, how much can they possibly ask you about? 30 to 40% of the passage. Good? Makes it manageable, right? Instead of like, I have to figure out what, this is what they want. All right? Cool. For the ACT, one of the challenges certainly is making sure you get through all of it, but this part of it is figuring out what type of reader you are. If you really feel like you can get through the passages quickly enough and you're retaining the information, your step one, which is read first and then go to the question second. Just the same way you do it in school. Read, answer some questions. Say you're like, but I feel like I can't get through all of it. Fine. Read half, answer the questions you can answer, and then come back for the rest. That way you're not taking in so much information that you have to store it the whole way through. There's 90 lines to get through, that's a lot. Annotating is the same thing. People, places, changes, so that still applies as well if you're going to annotate, okay? And then students who are like, you know what, I read like molasses is faster than I am. I'm like one word at a time, see, spot where I can't do it. Questions first, and then read what you need. Read second. All three of these work to the extent where I worked with the young man who, like the reading section was the only section he didn't really do well in. And when he figured out the order of the passages, because they're in the same order every time for the ACT. The ACT is very predictable. So he said, well, the final passage is easier. So I'm going to do that one first, and then I'm going to go back and do the other ones, because I've saved time. Because I only spent, on the last one, he only spent about 5 or 6 minutes, so he had a lot more time for the harder ones. And that was the difference when he did it this way, 1 to 4. He was topping out around 25, 26. On the official ACT, when he did that, he ended up with a 34. But it was just because he knew how to organize that information. But these are sort of the 3 areas that students end up in, because it's not a lot of time. And there's only so much you can do, right? But this is a great way to approach it. Cool beans. I believe that's it. So for a test that relies on pacing and timing, that's gotta be frustrating, especially when it's the last section. You're so burnt out, you're just trying to get through the end of the day. The biggest issue students had is in some of those practice books, they were only getting 6 passage tests, and then on the official they got a 7 passage. So it completely messed with their timing. Which is part of why I say use the official guides, because you'll get a good mix of both. Okay? This is ACT only for science. Okay. So the key to the science section is one thing. You have 35 minutes, you have 40 questions. There's some stuff to read, but it's mostly what again? Charts, tables, graphs. Okay, so how am I going to know what I need to look at in the passage? I know I need to look at graphs, but which ones? How do I know which ones to look at? Where can I find that information? The questions. Always look at the questions first. If 75 to 80% of this test is asking you to find data in tables, find the data you need. You'll save so much time. So much time. And that makes a huge difference for a lot of students who they keep reading it and they're like, I just can't, there's not enough time. Cool, just read the questions. And you'll find that most books will tell you. So I'm not saying anything that's not already in there, but you came to this, so now you don't have to read it, right? So questions first. Now, there will certainly be a few questions where you need to read some of it, but you know where to go. You're not trying to remember all that information, all that data. Some of these tables make my head spin, okay? Like I said, there's astrophysics in there. I'm like, it's like the size of a star and the sun is micro. I'll just look at the question and I'll find the data later, which is good. Cool. So that's science. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So that's it. Any final questions? You guys have asked some really good questions. I'm hoping that some of these strategies help you guys as you do start preparing. Yeah.
For the reading section, does the ACT have shorter passages than the SAT?
They're not necessarily shorter. They're a little bit easier to get through. You feel like you're just kind of reading for the sake of reading. I feel like for SAT, you're like, you gotta be paying attention the whole time or you're gonna miss something. The ACT feels like you're kind of like, you know, you're riding in the train or on a plane and you're just kind of reading. The material's not as heavy. But that's why you don't have as much time, is they feel like it's not as heavy. Yeah, so they're not shorter. They're just easier. Good question. Any other last questions? Yes.
Do you have any other like coping things? Like, are they allowed to suck on mints? Or should they be super hydrated the day before, but not that morning? You know, those are the physiological things that make
Absolutely.
a difference when you're taking a test.
100%. I mean, so we opened up by talking about how you go into the test psychologically is equally, if not more important than what you actually study. Because the test itself doesn't change. That's why it's standardized, right? They have to use the same stuff pretty much over and over again. So if you learn that, you're in good shape, but you're not getting enough sleep, you're not eating right, all those other things have much more of an effect. So I would say the most important things are the following. Your body operates on what's called a 48-hour recovery cycle. That's why you have arm day and leg day alternating. You don't do two in a row. Your body needs 48 hours to rebuild electrolytes and muscle mass and all those things that it's sort of lost. The same goes for sleep, okay? So it's Tuesday night before the test, Wednesday night before the test, Thursday night before the test, Friday night before the test. Test is on Saturday morning. Ideally, and I know this sounds like people are gonna laugh at me in junior year, they always do. I'm like, yeah, you need 8 hours of sleep on Wednesday. They're like, yeah, that doesn't happen, right? Especially for my full IB students. But if you can, starting on Wednesday, 6 to 8 hours of consistent sleep every night leading up to the test. Staying up all night on Thursday, saying, oh, I'll just get a ton of sleep on Friday, you're more tired on Saturday morning than you would have been had you gotten more sleep on Thursday night. I'm not saying stay up all night on Friday, but definitely don't stay up all night on Thursday. That is a big, 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 big no-no. Wednesday and Thursday, you need to get sleep. That's one of the biggest ones. Depending on when your test is, sure, you may have a project due. You may have a quiz the next day. Talk to your teachers. They know that you're doing this. I've never had a student come back to me and say, my teacher told me I couldn't reschedule this because I had my SAT or something like that. But you can't come to them the day before. Give them a couple weeks, say, hey, Miss so-and-so, can I take my quiz a day earlier? They won't say no to that, right? But, or can I come in at lunchtime and take it? taking ownership of that sort of stuff makes this part so much easier, so you don't have to come in 3, 4, 5 times to take this test. Okay? So sleep. Please don't go to Denny's and eat a Grand Slam beforehand. It's just way too much food. Protein. So if you're into eggs or bagels and lox, I don't know what people are eating these days. Bagels and cream cheese. You want to keep it light on that end. If you are a coffee drinker, you don't have to not drink coffee, but coffee is a stimulant. So for the SAT, it's a longer, drawn-out test. You're going to feel that at the end. But you just want enough to kind of, especially if you drink it fairly frequently, just enough to say, yeah, I've had my coffee, but you don't need a venti, waka chocolate, waka, whatever. I don't drink coffee, so I don't know what they're called, so. So that kind of stuff. I know typically students, orange juice is kind of a thing, with breakfast. Not on the morning of the SAT because it is very acidic and it's a diuretic. It makes you go to the bathroom a lot. You do not get to pause your test. You can get up and go to the bathroom anytime you want, but you don't get that time back. So water, apple juice is fine if you need something a little sweet. And definitely bring water or a snack. You may not eat during the test unless you have an accommodations that says you can. You'll be in a separate room with people. But you should definitely bring something to kind of keep you going. It's a long day. Last one. This one's super important. Alex, your test ticket said show up about this time, right?
Yeah.
That's not the right time. You need to be here at this time.
Yeah. Everyone's there.
Everybody's there.
It's like waiting outside.
And if you don't get to the door, they don't care if you've been standing in line for 35, 40 minutes. If you don't get in by 8, or if you don't get in by 7:45, because the test starts at 8 o'clock. I feel like that's really unrealistic for them to put that on the test ticket, because how are you going to get 200 kids in 15 minutes? I don't get it. But that's why I push that. And yes, experiences vary. I've had students that said, yeah, they let me in at 8:05. Great. But I've had other students that said it was 7:59 and they shut the door in my face and I didn't get to take the test. Much better time to show up. Okay? That's always a big one, especially if it's not at your home school. Okay? And you're not driving, because then mom and dad have to sit in the little, because they've never done that drive-through. They know how to drive you to your school, but not, someone else's school. So that's fine. Great question, thank you. All right. Now we're actually done. Thank you guys so much for coming.